The helicopter's rotors cut through the thick Afghan air as we approached the drop zone. I could feel the familiar knot in my stomach that came before every mission, but this one felt different. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera, that's me, had been through 43 combat operations in 18 months, but the briefing for this mission had been unusually vague. "Listen up, soldiers," barked Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, our commanding officer. Even through the headset, his voice carried that condescending tone I'd grown to hate. "This is a simple extraction. Intel suggests a high-value target is holed up in a compound outside Marja. We go in, we get him, we get out." The team consisted of 8 men from Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment. I looked around at the faces I'd served with for over a year: Corporal Danny Williams from Detroit, barely 22 but sharp as a tack; Sergeant Mike Chin, our medic, who'd saved more lives than any of us could count; Private First Class Tommy Martinez, the youngest of us at 19, always joking to hide his fear. Rivera, Harrison's voice cut through my thoughts. "You'll be taking point." I nodded, though something felt off. Usually, Sergeant First Class Bill Thompson, our most experienced soldier, took point on extractions. Thompson caught my eye and gave me a look that said he was thinking the same thing. "Sir, with respect," Thompson interjected, "shouldn't I be taking point? Rivera's good, but I didn't ask for your opinion, Thompson," Harrison snapped. "Rivera takes point. That's an order." The helicopter began its descent toward the dusty compound below. Through the small window, I could see the target building, a 2-story structure surrounded by high walls exactly as described in the briefing. But something was nagging at me. The intelligence photos had shown this place in daylight, yet we were hitting. 30 seconds, shouted the crew chief. I checked my equipment one final time: M4A1 rifle, body armor, night vision, extra ammunition, and the GPS tracker that would guide us to the extraction point. Standard gear for a standard mission, except nothing about this felt standard. Rivera, Harrison's voice came through my earpiece as we prepared to fast rope down. "Remember, you're expendable. Don't do anything heroic." The words hit me like a slap. In 18 months of service under Harrison, he'd never said anything like that to any of us. I caught Thompson's questioning look, but there was no time to process it. The green light flashed, and we were rappelling into the darkness. The compound was eerily quiet as we hit the ground. Too quiet. My training screamed that something was wrong, but I pushed forward, leading the team toward the main building. The sand muffled our footsteps as we moved in formation, each man covering his assigned sector. "Movement, 2 o'clock," whispered Chin through the comm. I looked where he indicated and saw nothing but shadows. My night vision showed empty courtyard, abandoned vehicles, no signs of life. For a high-value target, this place seemed remarkably undefended. "Proceed to the building," came Harrison's voice from the command post they'd set up a kilometer away. "Target should be on the 2nd floor, eastern room." We reached the entrance. I held up my fist, signaling the team to stop. Something was wrong with the door. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Or as if someone was expecting us. "Sir, the entrance is unsecured," I reported. "Looks like someone left fast." "Proceed with the mission, Rivera." "That's an order." Thompson moved up beside me. "Marcus, this feels like a setup," he whispered, using my first name, something he only did when he was really concerned. "I know, but we have our orders." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was dark, lit only by our night vision. Furniture was overturned, papers scattered across the floor, as if the place had been searched or abandoned quickly. We moved through the ground floor methodically, clearing each room. "Ground floor clear," I reported. Moving to 2nd floor. The stairs creaked under our weight despite our attempts at stealth. Each step felt like it was announcing our presence to anyone who might be waiting. At the top of the stairs, a long hallway stretched before us with doors on both sides. "Eastern room should be the 3rd door on the right," Thompson said, consulting his map. We moved down the hallway. I could hear my own heartbeat through the tactical headset. The 3rd door was closed, unlike the others we'd passed. I signaled for the team to stack up in breaching formation. "On my mark," I whispered. 3, 2, 1. I kicked the door open and we flowed into the room. It was empty except for a single wooden chair and a table. On the table was a manila envelope and what looked like communication equipment. A radio, some kind of transmitter. "Room clear, but sir." I started to report, then stopped. The envelope had my name written on it. Not my rank and last name, not team leader, my full name, Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera. "What is it, Rivera?" Harrison's voice crackled through the comm. I walked over to the envelope with a growing sense of dread. Thompson covered the door while the rest of the team secured the room. I opened the envelope and found a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed Harrison shaking hands with a man I recognized from intelligence briefings, Khalil Ahmad, a known Taliban commander who'd been responsible for at least a dozen attacks on coalition forces. Your commander has been very helpful to our cause. Tonight, you will discover just how helpful. The man you call Harrison has been selling information about American operations for 18 months. This compound is a trap. Your team was never meant to survive this mission. K.A. My blood ran cold. I looked at Thompson, whose expression behind his night vision goggles told me he could see something was terribly wrong. Marcus, what is it? Before I could answer, the radio on the table crackled to life. A voice speaking accented English came through clearly. American soldiers, you have walked into our trap exactly as your commander promised. You are surrounded. Surrender now and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Contact! Shouted Martinez from the window. I've got movement all around the compound. Looks like 30, maybe 40 hostiles. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't an extraction mission. It was an execution. Harrison had sold us out, sent us into a Taliban stronghold to be captured or killed. The question was why? Rivera, report. Harrison's voice came through the comm, but now I could hear something different in his tone. Not concern for his soldiers, but anxiety that his plan might be going wrong. I looked at the photograph again, then at my team, 7 good men who trusted me to lead them home. Thompson, who had a wife and 2 young daughters in Georgia. Chun, who was planning to propose to his girlfriend when we got back to base. Martinez, who sent half his pay home to help his mother in San Antonio. Sir, I said into my comm, making a decision that would haunt me forever. We're in a compromised position. The intel was wrong. This isn't a safe house. It's a Taliban stronghold. Understood. Proceed with extraction of target. Sir, there is no target. This whole thing is a setup. The note was in English, written in neat handwriting. There was a long pause. Then Harrison's voice came back, and this time he wasn't even trying to hide his true intentions. Rivera, you always were too smart for your own good. Since you've figured it out, let me be clear, you're not worth saving. None of you are. This mission ends with no American survivors. That's an order you can't follow. The comm went dead. Thompson looked at me with understanding and fury in his eyes. He sold us out. Yeah, he did. So what's the plan, Sergeant? I looked around at my team, my brothers, knowing that in the next few hours, most or all of them would probably die because of Harrison's betrayal. But I also knew we weren't going down without a fight. The plan is we survive this, I said, checking my ammunition. And when we get home, we make sure everyone knows what Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison really is. Outside, I could hear vehicles approaching and voices shouting in Pashto. The Taliban fighters were positioning themselves around the compound, confident that they had us trapped exactly where Harrison had promised to deliver us. But they didn't know Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera. They didn't know that I'd grown up in the worst neighborhoods of East LA, that I'd survived gang wars before I was old enough to vote. They didn't know that I'd rather die fighting than live knowing I'd failed my men. The battle for our lives was about to begin, and I was the only thing standing between my team and the betrayal that was supposed to kill us all. The first explosion shook the entire building. Mortar rounds landed in the courtyard below, sending debris crashing against the windows. I could hear the distinct whistle of incoming RPGs mixing with the staccato rhythm of AK-47 fire. Everyone away from the windows. I shouted, but my team was already moving. 18 months of combat had taught us all to react instinctively to the sounds of incoming fire. Chin grabbed his medical bag and moved to the center of the room where he'd have the best access to treat wounded. Thompson positioned himself at the eastern window with his M249 saw, while Martinez and Private Jackson took the western wall. Corporal Anderson and Specialist Brooks covered the door we'd entered through. Ammo check. I called out. 200 rounds for the saw, plus sidearm, Thompson reported. 7 magazines rifle, 45 rounds sidearm, said Martinez. The count went around the room. We had enough ammunition for maybe 30 minutes of sustained firefight if we were lucky and conserved every shot. Against 40 Taliban fighters in their own territory with no extraction plan and a commanding officer who wanted us dead, our chances were mathematically zero. But mathematics had never stopped me before. Rivera, Thompson called from his position. Take a look at this. I crawled over to his window and peered out through the night vision scope. The Taliban fighters weren't just surrounding us, they were setting up a perimeter that looked suspiciously like a capture operation rather than an assault. Spotlights, barriers to funnel us toward specific exits, teams positioned to take prisoners rather than eliminate targets. They want us alive, I realized. For what? Before I could answer, a voice came through a bullhorn outside, speaking heavily accented English. American soldiers, we know you are inside. Your commander has told us much about you. If you surrender now, you will be treated well. If you fight, you will die slowly. I keyed my radio, broadcasting on the frequency Harrison would be monitoring. This is Bravo Team Leader to command. We are surrounded and under heavy fire. Request immediate extraction and close air support. Harrison's response came back immediately, and he wasn't even pretending anymore. Negative, Bravo Team. No extraction authorized. You are to hold position and await further orders. Sir, we need immediate support or we're all going to die here. That's the idea, Rivera. You know too much. Thompson looked at me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The rest of the team had heard the transmission through their comms. I watched as the realization hit each of them their own commanding officer had sent them here to die. Sarge, Martinez said, his young voice cracking slightly, what do we do? I looked around at these men, boys, really, who'd followed me into hell because they trusted me. Thompson, the veteran who should have been leading this mission. Chin, who'd saved more lives than he'd taken. Martinez, who still called his mother every Sunday. Anderson, Brooks, Jackson, Williams, all of them looking at me for answers I didn't have. We do what Rangers do, I said finally. We adapt, we overcome, and we survive. Then we go home and tell everyone what really happened here. The bullhorn crackled again. You have 5 minutes to decide. Surrender or we attack. I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Thompson, Martinez, Chin, you're with me. We're going to break out through the south wall and try to reach the extraction point on foot. What about air support? Asked Brooks. There isn't going to be any air support. Harrison's made sure of that. Then how do we get home? We walk. It's 60 kilometers to the nearest forward operating base. We move at night, hide during the day, and we don't stop until we reach friendly forces. Anderson shook his head. 60 clicks through Taliban territory? That's suicide, Sarge. Staying here is suicide. At least this way we have a chance. I pulled out the photograph from the envelope, Harrison shaking hands with Khalil Ahmad. This is why we're here. Our CO has been selling intelligence to the Taliban for over a year. Every mission that went bad, every ambush that seemed too well planned, every time we lost good people, it was because of the son of a bitch. The team stared at the photograph in stunned silence. Thompson was the first to speak. How long have you known? I found this 5 minutes ago. But looking back, remember Operation Red Sand 3 months ago? How the Taliban knew exactly where to hit our convoy. And the Kandahar mission, added Chin. They were waiting for us like they had our entire operational plan. Because they did have it. Harrison gave it to them. Another mortar round exploded closer to the building, rattling the windows and showering us with plaster dust. Time was running out. South wall it is, said Thompson. What's the plan? I moved to the southern window and looked down. There was a 20-foot drop to a pile of rubble that looked like it might break our fall without breaking our legs. Beyond that, about 50 meters of open ground to a low wall that could provide cover. We rappelled down using our ropes, moved fast to that wall, then bound by teams to the perimeter. Once we're outside the compound, we head southeast toward the mountains. The mountains? Martinez looked panicked. Sarge, those mountains are full of caves. Exactly. They'll expect us to head west toward the nearest base. Instead, we go through their territory, then circle back. It's the last thing they'll expect. Chun was checking his medical supplies. I've got enough for basic trauma care, but if anyone takes a serious hit, then we carry them, I said simply. Nobody gets left behind. Not like Harrison left us. The bullhorn announced. 2 minutes remaining. I took one last look at my team. 7 men who'd signed up to serve their country, who'd been betrayed by the system they'd sworn to protect. In 2 minutes, we'd either be dead, captured, or running for our lives through some of the most dangerous territory on Earth. Listen to me, I said, my voice carrying the authority of 18 months of keeping these men alive. What happens in the next few hours is going to test everything we are. Some of us might not make it home, but I promise you this, if I survive, everyone is going to know what Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison did to us. Everyone is going to know how the Army failed its own soldiers. Thompson nodded grimly. Hua, Sergeant. Hua, echoed the others. The bullhorn announced, 1 minute. I tied my rappelling rope to the strongest piece of furniture in the room, an old iron radiator that looked like it had been there since the Soviet occupation. Thompson, you go first with the saw. Set up covering fire from the wall. Martinez, Chin, you follow. Anderson, Brooks, Jackson, Williams, you come with me in the last group. Time! Shouted the voice outside. Immediately, the building erupted with gunfire. AK-47 rounds punched through the walls, spraying plaster and wood fragments across the room. An RPG hit the eastern wall, blowing a hole the size of a washing machine. Taliban used them as bases. Go! 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 I shouted. Thompson kicked out the southern window and disappeared over the sill. I could hear him hit the rubble pile below with a grunt, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of his saw opening up on full automatic. Martinez and Chin followed, then Anderson. Brooks was halfway out the window when an AK round caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing back into the room. Brooks is hit. Chen's voice came through the comm from below. Jackson helped me drag Brooks to the window. Blood was spreading across his uniform, but he was conscious and alert. Can you rappel? I asked. Yes, Sarge. Just hurts like hell. Pain means you're alive. Go. Jackson went next, then Williams. I was the last man in the room and the Taliban fighters were already at the door trying to break it down. I could hear them shouting orders in Pashto, coordinating their assault. I grabbed the photograph of Harrison and Ahmad, stuffed it into my cargo pocket, and went over the sill just as the door exploded inward. The rappel down seemed to take forever, though it was probably less than 10 seconds. I hit the rubble pile hard, feeling something in my left ankle twist painfully. But there was no time to assess the damage. Thompson's covering fire was keeping the Taliban fighters at the windows, but they'd be repositioning within minutes. Everyone mobile? I called out as I limped toward the wall. Brooks took one in the shoulder. You're limping, but we're all up, Thompson reported. Then we move. Now. We bounded across the open ground in teams of 2, using the classic fire and movement tactics we drilled 1,000 times. Thompson and Martinez provided covering fire while Chin and I moved Brooks to the wall. Then Chin and Brooks covered while the others leapfrogged forward. Behind us, the compound erupted with activity. Spotlights swept the area where we'd been. Voices shouted orders. Vehicles started up. They'd realized we'd escaped, and they were organizing pursuit teams. Southeast toward the mountains, I said, checking my compass. Stay low, watch your spacing, and remember, we've got 60 kilometers to cover, and they're going to be hunting us every step of the way. As we moved away from the compound into the darkness of the Afghan night, I could hear Harrison's voice in my head. You're not worth saving. Maybe he was right. Maybe none of us were worth the cost of the resources it would take to extract us from this situation. But we were worth saving each other, and we were worth making sure the truth came out about what he'd done. The mountains loomed ahead of us like black teeth against the star-filled sky. Somewhere behind us, pursuit teams were already organizing. In a few hours, the sun would rise and we'd be exposed in terrain that offered little cover. But we were rangers. We'd been trained for impossible situations, and more importantly, we'd been betrayed by the very system we'd sworn to serve. That betrayal had freed us from following orders that would get us killed. Now we were fighting for something more important than completing a mission. We were fighting to survive long enough to tell the truth. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days into our trek through the mountains. We'd lost 2 men. Specialist Brooks died on the second morning. The shoulder wound had looked manageable, but infection set in fast in the Afghan heat. Chun did everything he could with limited medical supplies, but without proper antibiotics and surgical facilities, there was nothing any of us could do. Brooks died quietly in a cave overlooking the Helmand River Valley. His last words asking me to tell his wife back in Ohio that he loved her. Private Jackson didn't make it through the second night. A Taliban patrol had spotted us during our crossing of a ridgeline, and in the firefight that followed, Jackson took a round through the chest. He held on long enough for us to reach cover, long enough to whisper that he was scared, long enough for Thompson to tell him he'd done good. Then he was gone. We buried them both with rocks in shallow graves, marking the locations on my GPS so we could come back for them someday, if any of us survived. By the 3rd day, we were down to 5 men. Myself, Thompson, Chun, Martinez, and Anderson. We were running low on water, almost out of ammunition, and the Taliban search teams were getting closer. Twice we'd had to hide while patrols passed within 50 meters of our position. But we were also getting closer to friendly territory. According to my map, Forward Operating Base Chapman was less than 20 kilometers northeast of our current position. If we could make it through one more night of movement, we'd be within range of American forces. That's when we ran into Captain Sarah Mitchell. We were resting in an abandoned shepherd's hut when I heard the helicopter. At first, I thought it was another Taliban patrol bird, but the sound was wrong, too smooth, too quiet. I crawled to the window and looked up to see a Black Hawk with American markings circling our position. "That's one of ours," Thompson said, relief evident in his voice. I grabbed my radio and tried to make contact. "American aircraft. This is Bravo Team Leader, Staff Sergeant Rivera. We are 5 American personnel requesting immediate extraction." The response came back in a crisp female voice. "Bravo Team Leader. This is Captain Mitchell, 160th SOAR. We've been looking for you boys for 3 days. What's your status?" "We have wounded, we're low on supplies, and we're about 15 clicks southeast of Chapman. Can you extract?" "Negative on immediate extraction. LZ is too hot. We've got Taliban teams converging on your position. But I can guide you to a safer pickup point about 5 clicks north of your current location." "Roger that. What's the situation back at base? Is Lieutenant Colonel Harrison coordinating the search?" There was a pause before Mitchell responded. "Staff Sergeant, I need you to listen carefully. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison reported your entire team Kia 3 days ago. Officially, you're all dead." The words hit me like a physical blow. Harrison hadn't just sent us into a trap, he'd already written us off, filed the paperwork, probably notified our families. In the Army's records, we were already ghosts. "Captain, I have information that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison has been collaborating with enemy forces. He deliberately sent my team into a Taliban stronghold." Another pause, longer this time. "Staff Sergeant, those are serious accusations. Do you have proof?" I pulled out the photograph that had started this nightmare, Harrison shaking hands with Khalil Ahmad. "I have photographic evidence of Harrison meeting with known Taliban commanders. I need you to get to that extraction point. We'll sort this out once you're safe." The next 5 kilometers were the longest of my life. We moved through terrain that seemed designed to break men, loose rock that sent avalanches of stones clattering down mountainsides with every step, steep climbs that left us gasping in the thin air, and always the knowledge that Taliban fighters were tracking us, getting closer with every hour. Chin was helping Martinez, who'd twisted his knee badly during our escape from the compound. Anderson was carrying extra ammunition for Thompson's saw. I was running on pure adrenaline and the knowledge that if we didn't make it to that extraction point, everything we'd been through would be for nothing. The LZ was a small clearing on a ridge line, barely large enough for a helicopter to land. We reached it just as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of red and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Captain Mitchell's Black Hawk came in low and fast, the rotor wash kicking up clouds of dust and debris. As we ran toward the aircraft, I could see Mitchell in the co-pilot's seat, a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and the kind of calm competence that came from years of flying dangerous missions. We piled into the helicopter, and I felt a sense of relief that I hadn't experienced in 3 days. We were safe. We were going home. We were going to be able to tell our story. But as the Black Hawk lifted off, Mitchell turned to me with an expression that made my stomach drop. "Staff Sergeant, I need to inform you that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison is currently at Chapman and he's been briefed on your survival. He's not happy." "What does that mean?" "It means he's already started damage control. He's claiming that your team went rogue, that you collaborated with Taliban forces, that the mission failure was due to your incompetence." I stared at her in disbelief. Even after everything he'd done, Harrison was still trying to destroy us. "Captain, I have proof." "I believe you, Staff Sergeant. But Harrison has 18 months of reports documenting what he claims are your poor decisions and insubordinate behavior. He's building a case that you're mentally unstable, that the stress of combat has affected your judgment." Thompson leaned forward from his seat. "So what you're saying is, he's going to court-martial us for surviving his betrayal?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." The flight to Chapman took 20 minutes. 20 minutes to process the fact that surviving the betrayal might have been the easy part. The real battle was going to be fought in hearing rooms and courtrooms, with our reputations and our freedom at stake. But I still had the photograph. and I had 4 witnesses who'd seen everything. As we approached the base, I could see vehicles lined up on the tarmac, military police vehicles. Harrison wasn't taking any chances. He was going to have us arrested the moment we landed. "Captain," I said, making another decision that would define my life. "I need you to do something for me." "What's that, Staff Sergeant?" I pulled out the photograph and handed it to her. "I need you to make sure this gets to someone who isn't part of Harrison's command structure. Someone who can investigate without interference." Mitchell looked at the photograph, her expression growing grim. "Holy shit. Is this what I think it is?" Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison shaking hands with Khalil Ahmad, a known Taliban commander. This photograph was waiting for us in the compound we were sent to assault. Ahmad wanted us to know that Harrison had sold us out. "Jesus Christ. Can you get this to the right people?" Mitchell nodded grimly. "I know someone at the Inspector General's office. Someone who can't be bought or intimidated." The Black Hawk touched down, and immediately we were surrounded by military police. I could see Harrison standing near the command building, watching with satisfaction as his plan reached its conclusion. But as the MPs placed us in restraints, I caught Mitchell's eye. She nodded slightly and tapped her flight suit pocket where she'd hidden the photograph. Harrison might have thought he'd won. He might have prepared for every contingency, corrupted every channel of communication, manipulated every report. But he hadn't counted on Captain Sarah Mitchell, a pilot who'd risked her life to extract 5 soldiers that the Army had already written off as dead. The next 6 months were a nightmare of interrogations, hearings, and legal proceedings. Harrison had indeed built a comprehensive case against us. Every mission report for 18 months had been carefully crafted to show a pattern of poor decision-making and insubordination on my part. Every negative incident had been documented and exaggerated. Every positive achievement had been downplayed or attributed to other factors. But Mitchell had gotten the photograph to Colonel Patricia Hayes at the Inspector General's office. Hayes was a 30-year veteran with a reputation for integrity that couldn't be questioned. More importantly, she had the authority to investigate Harrison without his knowledge. The investigation took 4 months. During that time, my team and I were confined to base, facing charges of dereliction of duty, cowardice in the face of the enemy, and collaboration with hostile forces. The Army newspapers ran stories about soldiers who had cracked under pressure and betrayed their oath. Our families believed we were traitors. My own mother stopped taking my phone calls. But Colonel Hayes was thorough. She traced Harrison's financial records and found unexplained deposits totaling over $300,000 during his 18-month deployment. She reviewed mission reports and found patterns of intelligence leaks that correlated with Taliban attacks. She interviewed Afghan sources who confirmed that Harrison had been in regular contact with enemy commanders. Most damning of all, she found Harrison's personal communications with Khalil Ahmad, including detailed plans for the mission that was supposed to kill my team. The court-martial that followed was front-page news. Harrison, faced with overwhelming evidence, eventually pleaded guilty to treason, conspiracy, and the attempted murder of American soldiers. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. All charges against my team were dropped. We were not only cleared of any wrongdoing, but officially commended for our actions during the mission and our survival against impossible odds. But the victory felt hollow. Brooks and Jackson were still dead. Their families had spent months believing their sons had died as traitors rather than heroes. The Army offered apologies and compensation, but no amount of money could give those families back the months of shame and grief they'd endured. Thompson retired immediately after the court-martial and moved back to Georgia to be with his family. Chen left the Army and became a paramedic in Los Angeles. Martinez finished his enlistment but never deployed overseas again. Anderson transferred to a different unit and served 2 more tours, but we lost touch after that. As for me, I stayed in the Army for another 6 years. I made sergeant major and trained young soldiers, always emphasizing the importance of loyalty, not just to the chain of command, but to each other. I told them about loyalty that goes both ways, about leaders who are worth following and those who aren't. But most importantly, I told them about a mission in Afghanistan where a commanding officer said his soldiers weren't worth saving, and how those soldiers proved him wrong by saving each other. 10 years later, I'm a civilian now, working as a security consultant and writing a book about leadership and betrayal in the military. I speak at military academies and training schools, telling the story of Operation Bitter Harvest, the name the Army gave to Harrison's betrayal. Last month, I received a letter from Khalil Ahmad, who is now in American custody awaiting trial for war crimes. The letter was brief. Mr. Rivera, you may find it interesting to know that Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was not the only American officer who sold information to us. The corruption went much deeper than your government wants to admit. Perhaps someday we will have the opportunity to discuss this further. I turned the letter over to the FBI. The investigation continues. Sometimes people ask me if I hate Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison for what he did to us. The answer is complicated. I hate what he did, I hate the lives he destroyed, I hate the families he shattered. But Harrison himself? He's just a weak man who made terrible choices for money. What I really hate is a system that allowed those choices to happen. A system where a commanding officer could send soldiers to their deaths without oversight, where reports could be falsified without scrutiny, where loyalty was expected to flow only upward. But I also learned something important during those 3 days in the mountains. Sometimes the system fails, and when it does, all you have left is the person next to you. Thompson, Chin, Martinez, Anderson, they didn't follow me through 60 kilometers of enemy territory because of rank or regulations. They followed me because we'd chosen to save each other when everyone else had given up on us. That's worth something. That's worth more than any medal or commendation the Army could give us. Harrison was wrong about one thing: we were worth saving. Not because of our value to the mission or the Army or the war effort, but because we were worth saving to each other. And in the end,